Not my story, but my father-in-law swears he was abducted on a camping trip in the northern Appalachians with about four other people. They hiked up near a lake and set up a campsite, and then set up camp. He says they all remember swimming, then eating dinner, but no one remembers cleaning up camp or going into their tents. They woke up about 10 yards away from their original site, in the exact formation that they had set up the camp, but all the little stuff was in the same spot, and there was no fire in the middle of the original area, but not in the new one. They pulled out a measuring tape my Phil had in his backpack from work and measured the distance between the stakes of the tent poles, and it was the exact distance between all the tent poles from where they originally were in the new area. And before anyone says anything, my Phil is a super light sleeper, according to my mill, and doesn't drink or do drugs, has no history or symptoms of mental illness, and was the first one awake. He still refuses to go hiking on that trail to this day. It's an easy hike, so he isn't trying to be lazy and get out of it. I was a young kid, grade school age. It was a hot summer night and I was headed to bed. I remember sitting in bed and having this bad feeling. More than just a feeling. I knew something was coming to get me, like a horrifying reoccurrence was about to happen again. That my body remembered, but my mind did not. I knew it was close. Possibly, I was within eyesight. I was terrified, beyond my wits, and had no idea of what, but it was going to get me no matter what I did. I hadn't sat down on my bed for more than a few seconds, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. I turned around slowly to scan my room, and it was the next morning. Just like that. I was still dressed and everything, still in mid-turn, except it was the next day. 1 second I was terrified at night, and as I turned around, it was the next morning. I felt well rested, yet only a second, which I was awake for, had passed. I went downstairs and got on with my day. I told people what happened, and they just acted like I told them there was grass in the yard, like it was the most mundane thing ever, so I dropped it. Still to this day, I can't explain this, but it seems similar to some people's experiences. I was around 14 or 15-ish and was asleep in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night, sat up, turned around, and looked at my phone to see the time, which was around 1 a.m. I turned back around and just sat there staring at my wall. I remember at that time, I wasn't really thinking about anything. I was just staring blankly at my bedroom wall. It was like my brain was asleep, but my body was awake and aware. For what seemed about 2 minutes of me sitting up and staring at the wall, my mom burst into my room. Her coming in so abruptly in the middle of the night startled me and broke whatever trance I seemed to be in. She said she had a funny feeling that she needed to come in and check on me to make sure I was okay. I told her everything was fine and that I just woke up randomly. When she finally left, I looked at my phone again and it was 4:37 a.m. 4 freaking 37 a.m. I had been sitting up staring at my wall for over 3 hours. Still to this day, I don't know what it was or why did that or what woke my mom up out of a dead sleep to come and check on me. Still gives me the spooks 6 years later. 9 years ago, I was camping in my northern BC with a group of friends. It was around 10 p.m. and we were in the middle of nowhere, roughly 50 kilometers from any town, store, etc. So it was super dark out. We were sitting around our fire and just listening to tunes and drinking beers, etc. At one point, we see a light up on the mountain across the lake from us. This was a decent-sized lake. I'd say roughly 5 kilometers across, surrounded by mountains. So, as we noticed the light, assuming that it's other campers that we could visit with, we flashed our flashlight at them, attempting to get their attention. First, we flashed our light twice, and then they flashed back at us twice, then 3 times. We were brainstorming going for a hike to go meet them when the light seemed to increase intensely, then proceed to fly from one side of the massive mountain to a mountain on the other side of the lake. It then sat there and flashed at us a few times, but we turned off our light, and at this point, we're shitting bricks. I remember just going into my tent and putting my sleeping bag over my head out of fear. I fell asleep and woke up, and everything was fine. But for some reason, there was roughly half a dozen dead, really big toads outside my tent. What the Still wonder to this day what the heck happened. Since I was a child, I had an irrational fear of one specific type of extraterrestrial, the ones known as greys. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I see them on TV or in magazines. If I'm at your house and you have a book on your coffee table with the depiction of one Communion by Whitley Stribler, for example, I will politely ask if I can turn the cover down. I have no idea where this fear stems from, since most phobias seem to originate from negative experiences. One possibility is that I have been abducted at some point in my life. Although I've never had the full abduction experience or even seen a UFO, I've had several weird experiences. Once, when I was about 6 or 7, I was on a trip to Washington with my mother on a train. The first night I remember looking out my window and all of a sudden, it wasn't night anymore. It was full daylight, and I was staring at Mount Shasta. My mom was acting weird too, and everyone on the train was jumpy. And the whole rest of the trip, something felt off. The next one was when I was a teenager. I woke up in the middle of the night, completely paralyzed. At the same moment, I heard what I can only describe as a choir-like sound fading into the distance, and a seemingly random thought came to me. Thank God they're leaving. Maybe they'll stay gone this time. I was out at night in the outer city, having a few drinks at a bar, watching my friend's band play. It was their first live show, and I went along by myself to give a bit of support. After the set and after a while of post-set drinking, I decided that I head out and catch a train home, as the station was about a 5-minute walk away. I remember stepping out of the pub holding my jacket. The street was reasonably busy, but not crowded, and it was a nice night. But I was feeling a little cold, so I stopped and pulled on my jacket. The instant I looked up after pulling up my zip, everything just changed. I was suddenly standing in the middle of an open grass park in the absolute pouring rain, about 25 miles from where I was outside the pub. I'm not sure how much time had passed because my phone was completely dead, and I didn't manage to get home for a long time. I ended up having to walk for a while to find the nearest main road and wave down an empty taxi, which was a bit of a miracle, luck-wise. I still had all my possessions, no money used or taken, felt completely fine. Still don't know what happened. This happened around 5 years ago. This happened to me when I was 10 years old in Calgary, Alberta, in 1970. I was walking home from school, cutting across the school sports field. Our house wasn't far. We lived across the street from the school. There wasn't any kids around since I had stayed late for a volleyball practice and the rest of the students had gone home 45 minutes earlier when school let out for the day. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. Something caught my attention from the corner of my eye, and I stopped and turned to the right to look at it. Floating directly above a house facing schoolyard was a large UFO. I was in the middle of the football field, so this is about 60 to 70 yards distance from where I stood. The UFO is big and almost touching the roof of the house. It is completely centered on the house, but it is so big, it also is above the house on the left and the right. The, the lots there are 50 feet wide, which puts the UFO at about 100 feet across and perhaps 25 to 30 feet tall. It is very bright, giving off a harsh white light, which is difficult to look at since it hurts my eyes. I look away, back towards my house, and see a car and a motorcycle on the side street, which intersects the street with the UFO. That street is about half a block away, and I remember being surprised and confused that the drivers are not reacting to the UFO, which clearly must be visible to them, and so obvious since it is so bright, but the traffic continues as normal. At that point, I become aware that something is forcing me to turn my head back toward the UFO. I'm turning and my field of view is changing, but I'm not the one doing it. I struggle to turn away, but I simply can't control any of my body. I remember a feeling of panic. Then the next thing that I can remember, I'm walking into my house. It is about 9:30 at night and dark outside. I can't recall anything of the last 5 hours. My parents were furious with me for being so late. Apparently, my parents and my two brothers have been trying to find me for hours. A voice thought in my head tells me to tell them that I'm not feeling well and I need to go to bed. I have no idea where that voice thought came from, but I do exactly as it suggests and ran upstairs to my room and go to bed. The next day, I still can't seem to explain what happened, and my mother is even more angry with me since my new school shoes are ruined. Since the tops of them are all scuffed and dirty, like I was dragged face down across the ground with my feet still dragging on the ground. I told my older brothers what happened, and they suggested I keep quiet about it, since nobody would believe me. Good advice, as it turns out, since in the many years since, most of the people I had shared the story with don't really know what to say afterward. Many years later, I was looking at my old school workbooks from that time, and they are full of drawings of UFOs, all of the same design. I was in the 6th grade. I woke up one day with four very small holes on my upper right thigh. It looked like the skin had been cut out in perfect tiny circles. Yet there was no blood. The circles were in a straight line and across my thigh horizontally, no more than 6 inches wide completely. I also felt very tired and couldn't remember what I had dreamt, which is weird for me since I pretty much remember every dream I have every night. I put band-aids on them and went to school as usual. The next morning, I wake up and there are 3 new holes right above the previous 4. I woke up once again very tired and drowsy and was now weirded out by how symmetrical everything was that I showed my mom, who said it was most likely ant or spider bites. Next morning, 2 more holes above the previous 3, and the morning after that, 1. This is when I was seriously scared since the holes now formed a triangle that pointed to my knee, and they weren't scabbing over. I was so tired and confused and was scared to go to bed, So I stayed up really late, but woke up the next morning, not even knowing when I had fallen to sleep. Only dark and then morning. When I did wake up, I was suddenly very alert, and when I threw my blanket off my legs, I found all the holes completely gone. No scabbing or scarring or any trace of the circles on my thigh. I showed my mom, and she just brushed it off as if they had healed like any other cut. I'm honestly not sure if this is related, but I do feel like there is a correlation. After this, I couldn't really comprehend math anymore. I had excelled at math all my life, but after this incident, it was like numbers had no meaning to me, and I couldn't figure out simple equations. I went to an advanced school and had been learning algebra and geometry and was doing great, but then it was like poof. All of my math knowledge and comprehension was gone. To this day, I can't do I can't even do simple addition problems without double checking them, and with more detail than I can recall from memory. For example, in my memory, I can't remember seeing any windows in the UFO, since the light was too bright to make out details. But in my drawings, there were large round windows all around the UFO, some with faces looking out. I was camping in a campground in North Georgia with some friends. It was starting to downpour, so everyone left their tents in the woods and decided to rent one of the on-site cabins for everyone to sleep in. I decided I'd just sleep in my car because they wanted to stay up late and I was tired from kayaking all day. I woke up to the rain stopping, and it was kind of cold in the car, and I had forgotten my sleeping bag in my tent. I checked the cabin to see if there was any room left, and the light was on and everyone was fast asleep. It was 3 a.m. I didn't want to squeeze in, so I decided to trek my way to my tent in the dark with a small pen light. In order to get to my tent, I had to pass by everyone's that they left. Mine was the last one, and even then was 50 feet at least from the previous tent before. I got in my tent, covered up with my sleeping bag, and prepared to catch the last few hours of sleep before sunrise. No more than 10-15 minutes from me getting in my tent, I began to hear light whispers right outside the tent door. They weren't in English, and to my recollection, indecipherable, not any language I had ever heard at all. Just as the voices started, two orbs appeared together outside the tent. They weren't the same glare as a flashlight would make, and both were of two different colors. That, to the best of my ability, had no real distinct color, just colorful. The whispers outside the tent began arguing louder between each other, but still in a hushed tone. And as the whispers grew louder, the lights began swirling around the tent, behind me, to the side, to the front, not in the movement that one could make with flashlights, and at this point I realized no footsteps could be heard. I uncovered myself and knelt on the tent floor, preparing for the zipper to come undone like in a horror movie, and I was flipping through my mind on what options to take. I was the most terrified I had ever been, fight or flight. The lights swirled faster, and the voices grew louder, but still breathy and whispery. My mind raced, and I was sweating despite the cold. And then, just like that, the light shut off, the switch and the whisper stopped, and nothing but silence of an empty wood. I stood there, as still as I could, and didn't dare go outside that tent till the sun came up. It was, and still is, the scariest moment of my life. So, I was about 15. Every night, a guy I'll call Jay and I would sneak out at about midnight and go back home about around 4 to 5 in the morning before our parents would wake up for work. On one particular night, we had just snuck out and it was about 1 a.m. We headed to my backyard, laid on the trampoline, and stared at the stars and talked like we always did. Now, if you're in a room right now and you look around, you'll see the definite four corners where your ceiling and walls meet. You can see how square they turn. Edge of wall, sharp turn, second wall, same with the ceiling. You can see each individual flat surface. The sky did that. It went from staring at the stars to looking like a cube of sky. From the southeast corner of the sky came this giant UFO. I mean, huge, as it took up a quarter of the entire sky. We both stared at it in dead silence. It didn't make any noise, even as it moved, and while it spun, it was only hovering straight. The spinning didn't move. It looked like you imagine a frisbee doing. The sides just turned while it moved. I guess what it looked like doesn't matter, but Jay and I had our eyes dead set on it. We didn't say a word. We didn't point to show the other person. As it began coming toward us, we both flipped over. Again, no hints, no talking, no eye contact. In total sync, we flipped onto our stomachs and stayed as flat and quiet as we could. Now dunking from something sounds totally normal and instinct, but that's not what this was. It was literally almost like telepathy. I can remember us having a mental conversation of stay flat and it won't see us, don't move. We watch it make a weird angled C shape across the sky, and although it felt totally in slow motion, it could have only been a few minutes because I think both of us held our breath the entire time. Now, for the weirdest part, as soon as it was out of sight, boom, daybreak. We had literally just gotten to the yard, and I know it was 1:15 a.m. because I checked. But the minute we felt released from laying flat, it was very bright, like 7:30, 8 a.m. bright. I don't remember talking to him at all afterwards, other than making eye contact and then making a break for our homes before our parents noticed we weren't there. A few weeks, even months maybe, I'm talking to my brother's girlfriend about what happened. Apparently, she's real into that shit, but also completely terrified. She said the fact that it felt like a few minutes, but then it was suddenly 6, 7 hours later, truly 100% makes her think we were abducted. She was serious. I made a joke about how I should go to hypnotherapy to unblock the memories, and she deadpans and says don't. People who are abducted are traumatized by what happened to them. They even get PTSD. The next day, she texted me about how she couldn't sleep. I think abduction is a little bit of a stretch, and she watched too many Discovery Channel documentaries. But the weird loss of time still irks me. I do know what we saw was 100% real. Aliens? I don't know. Abduction? I don't know. My boyfriend at the time, had just gotten home from work. He went into our kitchen, and I walked through the bedroom and into the bathroom and just stopped for a moment. I had a weird feeling. I still can't really put a name to it, so I called him and asked him to come here. I walked out of the bedroom, and as soon as we came within view of each other, that was it. The next thing we knew, we were both waking up, laying side by side on our bed, flat on our backs, on top of the blankets, and still fully dressed down to our shoes. 3 hours had gone by. It was so odd and disorienting, and though we had both just come to, we were extremely tired, and we joked about the lost time at first, but the more we thought about it, the more weirded out we became about the whole ordeal. This isn't proof or anything, but I've never had able to think of anything else it could have been.